Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob Pollock, and welcome to the second meeting of the Owners Octagon. Today, we are joined by Michael Jordan, who is the president and founder of Michael Jordan College Prep, which provides one-on-one test prep and college application support to students in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and beyond. But perhaps more importantly, he's a board member and founding member of the National Test Prep Association. And prior to that, he was a National Merit Scholar and earned his degree in music education from the University of North Texas. He's a certified teacher, and as you'll probably hear about today, was a former band director, and that experience helped him become one of the best delegators and problem solvers you'll ever encounter. Before I officially introduce him, just want to note today's meeting will be recorded up until the question and answer portion, just to give us freedom to chat openly about our businesses and questions, issues we're having. So Michael's here today to share with us some of the ways that we can ease our own delegation issues and give ourselves more time. So let's welcome Michael Jordan, who's going to present to us about how to delegate more effectively. Michael?
Hey, thanks, Rob. Happy to be here. Good morning, all. I'm excited to present this. Rob asked me to kind of do a rehash of a presentation I did at the very first summer NTPA conference back in 2021 in Washington, D.C. It was a well-received presentation. I got a lot of great feedback on it, and so I'm happy to kind of represent it and issue the same things. It's interesting looking at this room. Several of you were in that room when I presented this for the first time, so I'm happy to present it to you again. I'm going to give you a little background of kind of how I got here and what led me to learn how to delegate and learn how to shift responsibilities. I've got an interesting story that's different than a lot of you. I always find it interesting in this community that we all come from very different backgrounds, but often arrive at the same solutions, just from different pathways. So I'm interested to present what I know. So let me share my presentation and let's get this going. So this presentation is called How to Train Your Donovan. Give me a thumbs up if you can see my slides. Thank you. This presentation is called How to Train Your Donovan. As many of you know, I have a fantastic right-hand man, my general manager, Donovan Kelly, who essentially runs my business for me. There's several reasons for why I have someone run my business for me that we'll get to, but this is just about how to kind of develop a Donovan, whether that's one person or whether Donovan is fractured into multiple personalities for your business. That would be unique to you. So we're going to talk about delegation, getting things off your plate, freeing up some bandwidth for yourself, and how to move in that direction. So first, how it started. As Rob pointed out, I moved from Kansas to the University of North Texas, moved to Denton, Texas. UNT is the premier college for music education in the United States, which is why it took me 500 miles south from Lawrence, Kansas, down to Denton, Texas. I became a high school band director down in Texas, which is a huge role, mostly because of the function of football in Texas. And bands have massive budgets. If you haven't seen some of the championships for Texas bands, it is absolutely remarkable what they can do. The time that's invested, the money that's invested into band programs down here is really remarkable, and I think unparalleled anywhere else in the country. As a high school band director, I learned how to manage a six-figure budget, which is not a small task, especially in my early 20s. I learned how to confidently send emails to thousands of people on a list without worrying about a single mistake. I learned about scheduling, event planning, planning tours for band programs. I learned about creating and maintaining physical systems, personnel systems, leadership systems, systems that made life easier for myself, not more complicated, systems that improved our efficiency, systems that utilized our resources, putting together backups and fail-safes for our program so things wouldn't crumble if something odd happened. And I learned how to write processes, technical writing with detailed criteria that couldn't be misinterpreted, skewed, criteria that students could understand, processes that high school students could follow. But finally, in 2013, I left public school teaching because I felt essentially underappreciated, overworked, and constantly on edge. I think as many public school teachers can relate to. Bureaucracy is tough when it comes to public education. So I left public school teaching in 2013. I fully intended to go back to public school teaching that fall in a new role. But I started tutoring, and it really started to take off, and I decided not to go back into the classroom that year. So principle number one, we're going to talk a little bit about how I got into where I am now, but we're going to go through several principles and several tools. And so the first principle, number one, you have limits. We all have limits, but you can extend yourself through delegation. Essentially, you can create more arms for yourself, more feet for yourself to get more things done if you can effectively delegate. So my progression between being a tutor, um, in college and then my first teaching job. So after I left the classroom, and just to note, I had done some test prep tutoring while I was in college. And so that was kind of a natural thing to move into after I left the classroom in 2013. End of 2013, I was working at a Huntington Learning Center in Coppell, Texas, very close. I was also working for Study Point, doing some in-person one-on-one tutoring through Study Point, and then also doing a little bit on my own. And in July 2014, I left Huntington permanently while I started to fill up my own personal tutoring hours. The original name of my business was Direction Tutors for a lot of reasons. I had just gotten divorced. I had just lost a very close grandmother. And of course, I had just left band directing. And so I felt like my new tutoring gig was a new direction for me. And so for a lot of reasons, I felt like I was giving students direction. I was kind of creating a new direction for myself. And so I named my business Direction Tutors. And I realized that working on my own at my own rate for about 20 hours a week, I was making the same amount that I would work if I worked for 111 hours a week at Huntington, which is obviously untenable. And so having that new income and kind of feeling it out on my own, feeling some early success, I really started to feel like I could do something with this tutoring gig on my own. It wasn't just a side gig. It wasn't just an intermediary waiting for the next gig. It could really be something. And so in August of 2014, I started the process of systems building. And again, this was just by myself as a solo tutor. But I really felt like, this could grow into an actual something. And so I started to create templates. I started to create templates for emails that I would send out to families, intro emails, follow-up emails, session emails, reminders, all those kind of things, just so I didn't have to reinvent the wheel with every single student. I started to create some repeatable processes. I started to document everything I was doing. And so next, in March of 2015 through about June of 2015, I was working my tail off, working far too much. And finally, in June 2015, I felt a burnout. And I was at rock bottom. I was exhausted. I was mentally exhausted, physically exhausted. And so I called my dad. My dad is the wisest person in the world, as far as I'm concerned. And so I called him and just kind of laid out how I was feeling. And he started to ask me some questions. He asked me, how much I was working. And I looked at the calendar and I looked through a typical week and I just had 34 hours of tutoring, which I didn't understand. How would I burn out after 34 hours of tutoring? But then I added up all the secondary and tertiary parts of that. I was doing all in home. I was doing all my own consultations. So on top of 34 hours of tutoring, I was doing about 5 hours per week of consultations. And then since I was doing in-home, I was doing about 20 hours of travel per week. And so add all that together, and that's about a 60-hour week every single week. Saturdays and Sundays, I would stack sessions and do 9 to 11, 11:30 to 1:30, 2 to 4, 4:30 to 6:30, and then 7 to 9. I would do that on a Saturday and then repeat on a Sunday, of course, with 30 minutes of travel in between those sessions. The next question my dad asked was how many days I'd worked without a day off. And I looked at the calendar, and it had been a full 40 days that I had worked without a single day off. And so I started to realize that just working by myself and doing everything just wasn't tenable. I couldn't stick with it. And so I had that call with my dad. I had tears. I had a mini collapse. And then I kind of rebounded and figured out what to do from there. I was working hard, but I saw others accomplishing more in the same 24 hours that I had, and didn't understand why other people could get more things done when I just felt like I didn't have enough hours in the day. And so I realized that I had limits. Interesting quote, hell is meeting the person you could have been if you had delegated. I realized I had limits. I had limits of mental energy. I had limits on physical resources. I had limits on my own physical energy. And most importantly, I had limits on the tolerance for doing things that I can't stand doing. A lot of my burnout came because I wasn't doing things that I loved. I was doing things that I just absolutely couldn't stand. And so we get to principle number two. Principle number two is about setting a vision. Establish a clear vision of where you want to be, define the resources it'll take to get there, and then clarify your definition of done. And we're going to go through each of those pieces and what those mean. I've had a lot of business calls with NTPA members, and often it's when they are most frustrated, it's when they're most burnt out, it's when they want to quit, and they need some answers. And I feel like I do a good job of not only giving answers, but asking questions and probing for the reasons behind why things are what they are. And so with this principle of establishing a vision, it's about outsourcing everything that's on your plate, starting to outsource that and kind of design what operations look like for you. And of course, that's different for everybody. Everybody's definition of a clear vision is going to be different. The resources that you have are going to be different. And the definition of done, of where you want to be, is also going to be different. But no matter what, if you don't have a vision, you're spinning your wheels, no matter how well things are subjectively going. You don't know where you're going. You are literally just spinning your wheels. So for one, my vision. My vision was to have a business that I love, working in and on, that'll give me a creative outlet, leverage my skills to the highest potential, and give me freedom and flexibility to do the things that I actually love to do. And so with that, in late 2015, I hired my first tutor. Actually, somebody reached out to me. I wasn't looking for an employee. I wasn't looking for a tutor, but somebody reached out to me and asked if they could potentially work for me. They were moving from another place in Texas into Dallas. They had researched some companies, found mine, kind of found a shared vision just based on what was on my website, et cetera, and reached out and wanted to ask if this person could work with me. So I hired Lawrence Chang, back in 2015 and trained him to be just as capable as a tutor as me and potentially be my replacement on the ground. I wanted to have kind of a mini MJ who could take my place so that, back to the vision, I could leverage my own skills to the highest potential and gain some freedom and flexibility. So with adding Lawrence to the team, we both were working 40 hours a week. I was able to double my consultations without very much friction. And we went from about $20,000 in revenue in 2014. Yes, that's all I made in 2014, to six figures in 2015, just with adding one person. And that's some leverage. When it comes to resources, this is how you start to expand and kind of grow those other arms besides just the two that you have. The vision is, what your goal is. The resources are what you have to start to accomplish that goal. And those resources are different for each person. But for me, some of those resources were team and personnel as I started to grow. Of course, marketing and or referrals. Those are part of the resources to expand. And then, almost more importantly, systems and processes to sustain the reputation of the brand. My goal was that we weren't going to dilute. I didn't want to dilute our quality. I didn't want to dilute the experience that I was giving to students and families by adding people. And so that requires system and processes. You can't just add a person to your team and hope that they're going to be your clone. That's just not the case. Lastly, the definition of done. This is an important piece. Again, back to the thought of, without a vision, you're spinning your wheels. Well, the same thing is true unless you have a definition of done. What is your definition of success? How do you know when you've accomplished your vision utilizing your resources? And so my definition of done was that my business would run without my own day-to-day involvement. I could remove myself from my business and my business would continue to run as its own entity. It's not dependent on me. I want to be redundant. I could cease to exist and my business would still run by itself. Secondly, I'm able to creatively work on my business when and how I want to. That's part of the freedom and flexibility that was part of my vision. And then lastly, I get to be the expert. This is the part of leveraging my own skills to the highest potential. And we're going to come back to that piece in a little bit. Next, starting to let go. This is, as I've talked to many members and done some consulting, this to me is the biggest limiting factor of being able to delegate and kind of spread your wings and get some things off your plate. We all have some limiting beliefs that affect delegation and how we process tasks. First one, Perfectionism. I can do it better myself. It is hard, hard, hard. I think especially in our industry as intelligent people with a bit of control freak paralysis, perfectionism is tough. We all think that we can do it better ourselves. And this is a tough one to get by. Second one, distrust. My people can't meet my standards. Obviously, very close to the first, the perfectionism. But if you fundamentally believe that people can't meet your standards, then you're not going to be able to help them rise to your standards. That's just a limiting factor that we have to get past, and I'll talk about how to get past some of these in a little bit. Scarcity. I don't want to delegate because that process itself will take too much time. That's very immediate thinking. It's not very forward thinking, but that scarcity mindset is really in the moment thinking you don't have enough time to share your skills, resources, etc., with somebody else. There's an element of fear, I think, that we all have, that you're going to build systems, and then what if it crashes and burns? What if you put in all this work and then everything just goes to hell? I think we all felt that fear in early 2020 when we thought our industry was disappearing, which I think led to part of the success of NTPA and why we're here today. Ego. Ugh, this is a tough one for me, that if I delegate, if I share some of my knowledge, if I share some of what I have in my head with somebody else, then it's going to reduce my authority. I'm starting to dilute things. That is just not the case. Another ego. If I train somebody and if they do a good job, does that make me replaceable? We all have that pride piece that we want to feel important. And if we start to share what we have in our heads, maybe that makes us less important. That's tough. And last, third, ego. Everyone prefers if I just do it. Everybody wants me, essentially. That's a tough one. We rebranded back in 2016. We rebranded from Direction Tutors to Michael Jordan College Prep. And mostly the reason for that was nobody referred to us as Direction Tutors. They just called us Michael Jordan's company. I am blessed and cursed with a famous name, and people just like to refer to that. I rebranded to Michael Jordan College Prep, partially because there is a big test prep company here in DFW called Karen Dillard College Prep. They go through thousands of students per year. I think they've worked with over 100,000 students. But the interesting thing is, if you go to Karen Dillard College Prep as a large organization, if you walk in the door, you don't expect to talk to Karen Dillard. Because you know it's a large organization under her name, you don't go in expecting to meet the person. And so I rebranded to Michael Jordan College Prep, not to make the business focus on me or make me some kind of big deal, but really almost because I wanted to grow to a place where people didn't expect to actually work with me. And it's actually worked out really well. It's just a little bit counterintuitive, but it's hard to get past that place as an owner. It's hard to get past the place of everybody wants me. Everybody prefers that they work with me. But really, if you start to train your people successfully, that piece is going to start to go away. So how to tackle, pardon me, how to tackle some of these limiting beliefs? 3 of these start with ego, and I think all of these go back to ego, but 3 I kind of nailed down with ego. The first is to identify, which limiting beliefs are holding you back from sharing some of the things that are on your plate. What things are holding you back from getting things off your plate? Start to question, where did that come from? What feeling does that, what feeling prompts that in you where that is a fear? Search for counterexamples, number 3. As you look at these things, what if it crashes and burns? Well, think back to a time where you have a counterexample to that, a situation where you did offload some things. It negatively, like maybe you didn't do your job and it started to go south. Well, a week later, was that really an issue? Probably not. You're able to resolve that. You're a professional. You're able to get past that and move forward. And then lastly, after you think of some counterexamples for each of these limiting beliefs, try to prove yourself wrong. Do something where one of these might come up and try to prove yourself wrong with a low risk or no risk experiment where you provide yourself with that counterexample of, no, I can get past that, and that's not necessarily a thing. Principle number 3. When I was a band director, I got to know John Whitwell, who was a director of bands emeritus from Michigan State University. I got to know John Whitwell fairly well, both by visiting him as he worked with different bands and also hiring him as a clinician to work with my bands. And this is a phrase I stole directly from him. This does not come from me. This comes from John Whitwell. But do only the things that only you can do. This is one of my core principles to my business, that we should be specialists. Yes, we can be generalists. I can cover lots of different material and lots of different domains. But really, I'm looking for the places where I have unique leverage, where really I am most successful and I can use my distinct strengths in a way that only I can do. Um, Expertise has value. We are all experts in our own domains. We've all learned from other people. We've learned from someone else, somewhere else, etc. And so we start to figure out our unique capabilities that we've learned from others and things that we've developed. And the more that you can really zoom in on those, figure out your unique points of leverage, then you can start to figure out what your unique points of leverage aren't. What are the things that you're doing that other people could be doing? And if you focus on the things that only you can do, you're really focusing on the unique qualities of yourself and then each person around you. As we started to grow organically in 2016 through 2018, I was building manpower, I was building referrals, but I didn't necessarily have the systems and processes to sustain quality. Like I said earlier, I didn't want to dilute what we were doing because it was successful. And so my reason for hiring a first administrative assistant, my first admin back in 2016, was so I could focus on that system building and they could focus on the day-to-day operation. And that was something that not only I could do, that's something that I could outsource. And it would allow me to focus on the things that only I could do. This isn't something that's only applicable to our industry. It is definitely applicable anywhere. I think even in my family life, I think about that too. But it's definitely a mindset to adopt of doing only the things that only you can do. And so we get to our next principle, principle number 4, systematically identify not the things that you should be doing, but the things that you shouldn't be doing. And so I'm going to give you a couple tools for helping to figure out the things that you shouldn't be doing. Tool number 1 is the Eisenhower matrix. This is named after Dwight David Eisenhower, a 5-star general in the U.S. Army. He prepared the strategy for the Allied invasion of Europe and then served as the 34th president of the United States. And of course, with all those roles, he had to constantly prioritize many tasks on the table. I almost daily divide my to-do list up into segments based on this Eisenhower matrix, depending on if things are urgent or not urgent. Does this need to be done now, or can this be done another time? And then whether things are important or unimportant. Yes, there are things on all of our to-do lists that are unimportant, but still have to be done. And so I think of these in 4 different quadrants. When things are important and urgent, it's time to do them, get it done. If something's important but not urgent, that's something to schedule. Put it on your calendar, put it on tomorrow's to-do list, whatever the case. It doesn't have to be done now, but it does need to be done. In the unimportant and not urgent category, if something is not time associated and if it's not necessarily important, get rid of it. It doesn't need to be in your inbox. It doesn't need to be on your to-do list. But then lastly, we get to the urgent but unimportant category. And this is the category that I started to delegate. Things that weren't necessarily crucial, but things that were time-bound. So this is returning phone calls. This is returning emails. This is following up with clients after certain things. Those are things that you can absolutely delegate. The next tool, and this is one that Rob Pollock loves and gave me ample feedback on after the presentation, was hates and procrastinates. The things in your life on a weekly basis that you absolutely hate to do. And I like to give people an exercise of taking a week and keeping a little journal and writing down any time that you have to do something that you either hate or something that you tend to procrastinate. These are things you need to get off your plate. These are things that need to be delegated 100%. So spend a week, list your hates and procrastinates. Mine, email, I hate and I procrastinate. Phone calls, I hate and procrastinate. And follow-ups, I hate and procrastinate. So these are things that I try to get off my plate. And so as I started to think through some of these procedures, I realized that there are different types of delegates. And these are ones, I'm going to give you 3 examples, and these are ones that I've used over the years. First one was my first admin, which was an external admin, not somebody in our industry, not somebody with intimate knowledge of test prep or college prep. This is somebody I hired via Upwork. I think it was Odesk back then. But this is a person that I could give repeatable tasks. I could put together a process. I could put together an SOP, give this to my admin, and they could handle these things. This was a part-time person, and so there was nothing that I would give them that was incredibly time sensitive. Maybe something that needed to be done within the next 48 hours, but nothing immediate necessarily. And they were mostly a personal assistant, taking things off my personal plate so I could focus more on the brand and the business. With this person, I had a high level of trust for basic tasks. So these are things like scheduling in Acuity and Calendly, doing consult prep. It was great because this person would create PDFs for my consults with all the incoming notes. All I had to do was open that PDF, start writing with my Apple Pencil on my iPad, and everything was there for me. I didn't have to do any pre-research. Consult follow-ups, diagnostic test grading, client follow-ups, blog outlining, Facebook stuff, CRM maintenance, all those kind of things are perfect for an external admin. The next was an internal admin. This was somebody who'd worked with me for several years and kind of wanted to shift roles a little bit. This person was named Heather. She had years of experience with me, and so she knew the internal operations, kind of how things flowed. And so we started to put together some decision matrices to do some thought work, helping to look at a diagnostic test and be able to point a student in SAT or ACT direction. This is where I really started to kind of hit my stride, and I found out how I could train the best. My training model is 100% modeling, and it worked. So with Heather, instead of directly training her or giving her instructions or lecturing, I would have her watch me do a process. I would have her document the process, and then that was her training material, is she had that documentation. Well, look, what's great about that is she had already created the documentation for the training process. So then when Heather was gone and I needed to train somebody else, I already had that training document. And that modeling technique is what I've used ever since. Rather than direct instruction, I have somebody watch me do something, I have them document it, then I don't have to write the SOP, I don't have to write the process, they do it for me, and it actually worked. And so at that point, Heather could accomplish business level tasks, high level tasks, with an understanding of my reasoning because she had written out the training process and the decision matrix. And so she could start to channel what I do in a situation, having observed a lot of different times of me handling those situations. Next, an internal director. This was my Donovan. And I really thought, well, this was my pre-Donovan, I should say. This was right before I kind of figured out what I needed to set up as far as operations within my business. This was really my first gatekeeper. This was somebody who would check my email box and reply to people who had emailed me. Email management was big. Like I said, that was one of my hates and procrastinates. This person became my first point of contact for tutors and clients, essentially a full-blown manager. But unfortunately, there was a lack of clarity. I hadn't set up this role in the right way. I'd learned from my external and internal admins, but I had never had a manager or an internal director. And so there was a lack of clarity for the role. And then also because I was paying them part-time for the director role and then also part-time for tutoring, there was, yes, an inevitable conflict because of overlap between roles and of course with money. I was writing process documentation, but things weren't working. But what I realized after was that I had expectations that I couldn't define. There were things that I was hoping to happen. There were things that I was hoping that this person would do. There were directions in our business that I was hoping that things would go, directions that things would go, but I didn't have what I referred to earlier. I didn't have the vision, I didn't have the resources, and I didn't have the definition of done. And so this role kind of turned a little bit toxic and we had to separate. Well, what happens when things go wrong? Well, principle number 5, the buck stops with you. Anything that goes wrong in your business is probably your fault. When it comes to your people, when it comes to delegation, if things go south, it is probably because of you. To me, there are 3 reasons why things fail and why they are all your fault. First one, undefined expectations. This is when you have an expectation in your head. You're hoping that something goes a certain way, but you haven't actually defined what that looks like. Again, vision, resources, definition of done. Well, what's the solution to that? If you haven't defined expectations for your delegate or for your employee, and if they don't do something right, that's your fault. You haven't told them exactly what to do. How to resolve that? Clarify. Second, insufficient resources. This is when you have defined an expectation, but you haven't trained somebody to be able to accomplish it. Again, that's your fault. If you haven't trained somebody to meet your expectations, then you haven't provided them with the correct resources. That's your fault. Your job is to train. Third, non-compliance. This is when somebody knows your expectation, they know the vision, the resources, the definition of done. You've given them the resources, you've trained them to meet your expectations, but they just don't comply. That is also your fault, and you need to fire the person and find somebody new. So after my struggles with internal, external admin, and then a director that the role wasn't really explained, I finally found a Donovan. Donovan had been in my business since 2016. In 2019, my wife and I planned our epic honeymoon. Our epic honeymoon was across 11 countries over 2.5 years. We had planned to fly to Medellin, Colombia on July 18th, 2020, and we had all of our 11-country trip planned out. Donovan knew that this was going to happen in 2020, and so he actually approached me. We had lunch, and he said he was working at a private school at that time, at a Cristo Rey school here in Dallas, and he was looking to leave that role just to give himself some more flexibility. And so he asked, do you need a manager? Is there a role that I could step into? And yes, absolutely. I told him about our plans to leave the country, and how I would need somebody with boots on the ground to handle things here in DFW. And so how we kind of built the role of general manager for Donovan. Inception, that was the lunch that we had, just talking over what that role might look like. Me being really honest and vulnerable with him about, things that I felt were really going well, things that we could improve on, et cetera, et cetera. And so we established the vision for the role within the business. We talked about the resources. I talked about the definition of done. What would it look like if I had a successful director or manager? And so we started to shape that role and build that role of exactly what that would look like. I trained Donovan through modeling. I showed him all the processes that I did on a daily and weekly basis. A lot of those were through video. Some of those were in person, either synchronous or asynchronous, online via video, and then really establishing trust. And that's how we started to build the role of general manager, along with a lot of the other things that I've already discussed. So, principle number 6. We've talked about finding out what to delegate. How do you figure out what to delegate? You can use the Eisenhower matrix. What are things that are urgent, but not necessarily important? What are your hates and procrastinates? What are things that you want to get off your plate just because they don't give you joy? And then what are pain points in your process? I do a lot of business process mapping with different people, of everything from starting with a client to finishing with a client, et cetera, et cetera. What are pain points? What are squeeze points in that process where maybe you're losing business or you're not just being as effective as possible? And mapping that out really helps. I'll say it over and over again. Formula for successful delegation. This is the how. Figure out your vision. What are you trying to accomplish? Figure out what resources you have and resources you need. Those are both physical, mental, all of the above. And then what is your definition of done? The more you can figure out those 3 things and communicate those effectively to your delegate, that's when you're going to result in success. So your vision, find an example. What's your desired outcome? Whether your vision is a business, a presentation, a website, a piece of marketing collateral, an editorial calendar, a social media strategy, whatever the case, what is that thing that you're trying to develop? What is the consequence if it's not completed the right way? And then thirdly, find an example. Find an example from somebody else who has done it successfully and turn that into your vision. I'm not a fan of reinventing the wheel. Many of you know that. And so if you can steal from somebody else and steal their vision, even better. When it comes to resources, resources can be anything from access. This can be physical access. This can be digital access, whatever the case. This can be expertise. What would somebody have to know to be able to accomplish what you're looking for? Do you need to take a course? Do you need to buy a book? Do you need to, whatever the case, what is that expertise that needs to be there to leverage whatever you're delegating? Contractors, outside help, developers, editors, stylists, photographers, Google AdWords experts, whatever. You don't have to be an expert in everything. Find somebody who has that expertise. That's a resource. Software, systems, whatever the case, you can see there are lots of different resources that you just have to establish what do we need to get done what we need to get done. And then lastly, definition of done. How do you know when you are done? What's the finish line? Otherwise, tasks can just spiral. We start projects with the best of intentions, but things just start to kind of drag out and we're not necessarily effective about landing the plane and tying the knot, finishing whatever that thing is. So how do you know when you're done? What's the finish line? So the principles. Number one, you have limits, but you can extend yourself through delegation. You can grow extra arms as long as you can delegate effectively. Second, establish a clear vision of where you want to be. Define the resources it'll take to get there. Clarify your definition of done. Third, and this is almost most important to me, do only the things that only you can do. It takes time to define what that looks like, but I promise you it is worth the time spent. Fourth, systematically identify what you shouldn't be doing. Eisenhower matrix, hates and procrastinates. Fifth, the buck stops with you. Everything that happens in your business is your responsibility, and you just have to figure out how to negotiate with that. And then lastly, to be successful, delegation has to follow the formula, which I'm sure by this point you know. That's all I've got. Thank you very much for giving me the time and attention this morning, and I'm happy to start a Q&A and answer any questions you might have.
Thanks, Michael. That was amazing. Let's all celebrate Michael for such a great performance. And I'm going to turn off the recording now so that anyone who's watching this knows that they need to join the Octagon for the next meeting if they have questions and to get to the real valuable part where we get to ask you your thoughts and get your advice. So thank you to the watchers at home.